Yeah, I don't know where. They're not telling me.
What am I missing? What's going on? Oh, because of the veto override?
I don't know. I saw something actually for the he was meeting with the Republicans.
Man, I've been so busy. I don't even have time to turn the news. Okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they're not letting anyone into the building without.
That explains it. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah. At least there's a reason.
There's been a steady stream of agency folks coming in and out for days now.
Right.
tree, so and I'm downstairs.
I'm about to sing to the choir.
Say again?
I'm about to sing to the choir. Sing
Okay,
for
yeah.
SLS.
All right. I'm usually not the first one here, is it, sort of, Lenny? You were.
Here's the order they gave me.
I beat you. I'm making up for this morning.
Where I have the checkbook.
It's such an easy thing just to have more fun. The minutes really good at it.
Hearing will come to order. This afternoon, we have a great opportunity to hear from our colleagues in Congress about the programs and agencies that they care about. The CJS bill covers a lot of territory, so it is important that as we move forward with the fiscal year 2020 appropriations process, we try and put in priority what is important to those who serve with us. Last year, I noted to Chairman Cublerson that it is interesting that every member who came before us asked for further investment in the areas covered by this subcommittee. No one comes here to tell us to reduce funding for a program agency. It shows the importance of investing in our nation in everything from scientific research to a fair and equitable justice system to economic development and beyond. I look forward to the hearing from our witnesses, and with that, let me turn to my colleague, Mr. Vanderholt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for yielding. And certainly, as you mentioned, this subcommittee covers a wide swath of issues, important federal funding, from combating crime and terrorism, promoting trade, forecasting the weather, invest in basic research, and of course, space exploration. And so I will also want to thank the chairman for holding this member day hearing and allowing members from the House to be able to come before our subcommittee and to talk about issues that are important to them. I think it's vital that members do have an opportunity to convey their priorities and to educate us on issues that are important to them. We want every member to know that we are listening to you, and we want to try to accommodate every way we can as we proceed through the appropriations process. So with that, thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderholt. I just want to reinforce your comments. We may not keep you here a long time, but it doesn't mean we're not listening and we're not taking notes. Trust me. So our first witness, speaker, presenter is my colleague and brother from New York, Chairman of our Democratic Caucus, Mr. Jeffries.
Good afternoon, Chairman Sharano, Ranking Member Adderholt, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on funding priorities for the fiscal year 2020 Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. Before I say anything further, let me just state on the record our gratitude. The people of New York are grateful for the 45 years of iconic, legendary, distinguished service that you, Chairman Serrano, have provided to the people of the South Bronx, who are much better off for you having taken this public service journey. And we look forward to continuing to work with you through the balance of the 116th Congress. I am here to request that the First Step Act receive the full funding amount authorized by law. The First Step Act became law on December 21st of last year when it was signed into law by President Trump after passing the House of Representatives and Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, led in a significant fashion by Congressman Doug Collins. A key component of this important legislation was the authorization of $75 million per year for the Bureau of Prisons to expand and develop opportunities for incarcerated individuals to participate in programming and productive activities shown to reduce the risk of recidivism. This programming will provide returning citizens with the necessary tools for a successful and lasting transition back into their communities. It will also make our federal prisons more effective places of rehabilitation and eventually reduce overcrowding and save taxpayer dollars. Today, there are more than 180,000 inmates in the federal prison system. Almost every single one of them will be released at some point in time. However, high rates of recidivism suggest that we can do much better to prepare currently incarcerated individuals for reentry. Research has shown that programming, like the kind authorized by the First Step Act, will dramatically reduce recidivism and save taxpayer dollars. According to a recent study, inmates who participated in correctional education programs were 43% less likely to recidivate than inmates who did not. Congress passed the First Step Act to give individuals in the Bureau of Prisons custody a better chance to return to a productive and law-abiding life. Funding for the law's implementation is critical to achieve this goal. We have seen many examples of educational, vocational, and faith-based programming making a real difference in the lives of incarcerated individuals. While the BOP currently offers literacy classes, English as a second language, parenting classes, wellness education, and adult continuing education, demand greatly exceeds supply. One study found that 70% of incarcerated individuals who wanted to take an education program in order to expand their knowledge or skills and to increase their chances of getting a job upon release expressed an interest, but only 21% were actually studying for a formal degree or certificate because of the lack of capacity. Further, BOP has reported long waiting lines for work and educational programs. It's critical that we provide everyone who wants to participate an opportunity to do so. While the expanded programming and associated earned time credits will lead to significant long-term cost savings for taxpayers and improved public safety, the First Step Act must be fully funded at $75 million per year over a 5-year period to make these benefits possible. This is an opportunity to make a transformational investment in the lives of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals, giving them a chance to be bigger than the mistakes that put them behind bars, and to continue the progress that we have made in a bipartisan way on criminal justice reform. Once again, I thank the distinguished chairman and ranking member for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. We usually, at these meetings, don't ask many, if any, questions, but we want to first congratulate you on a bipartisan bill passing, which is unique every so often. And secondly, important question, is there someone in the Senate asking for this amount also?
It's my understanding that Chairman Grassley, who was the lead sponsor in the Senate, along with several other members on the Democratic side of the aisle, are fully supportive of the $75 million and will work to carry the load on the Senate side as well, since that was a critical and important part of the legislation.
Great. Is that all? Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Testimony. We'll call you when we get the money. Don't call us, we'll call you. Mr. Posey is next.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Serrano and Ranking Member Adderholt for holding this hearing today. Actually wanted to hear from members about what their priorities are, and thank you for the opportunity to come before you and talk about keeping America's space program first in the world. As you know, the United States is the only nation to have landed humans on the moon and returned them safely to Earth. It is among the greatest achievements in the history of mankind and has significantly contributed to America's leadership in the world. The Apollo missions opened the door to other significant accomplishments, like building space shuttles to test the limits of human spaceflight, prolonged robotic exploration of Mars, launching a space-based telescope that can see far beyond our solar system, and conducting scientific research on the International Space Station that is benefiting those of us on Earth, as well as enabling us to understand and prepare for challenges of long-term space missions. In 2010, Congress authorized the construction of NASA's Space Launch System, that you'll hear referred to as the SLS, as a successor to the Space Shuttle that will be capable of launching both cargo and human crews into space. The idea is to build a powerful rocket that will enable humans to return to the moon and eventually travel to Mars and other deep space destinations. The SLS and its Orion crew capsule have received strong bipartisan funding support by Congress over the past 9 years. Today, I ask you to continue that support in order to keep the SLS program on track and ready for its first mission next year. I respectfully urge you to consider a total funding level of $2.15 billion for the Space Launch System for fiscal year 2020, which would preserve the fiscal year 2019 approved funding level and avoid the proposed $400 million reduction in the administration budget request. This funding is necessary to complete the rocket and build the necessary infrastructure on the ground to support the first launch. Specifically, no less than $200 million is needed for the exploration upper stage, which will make it possible to have both human crews and cargo on board the same flight. The Orion crew capsule will serve as the exploration vehicle that will carry astronauts to space atop the SLS. For 2020, $1.5 billion is needed to continue building this cutting-edge Orion vehicle, the only capsule currently being designed and assembled which can protect our astronauts below low Earth orbit, in moon orbit, and around Mars. Lastly, we need to continue our efforts to build the infrastructure needed on the ground support for safe and successful launches. Exploration ground systems are critical to our space launch capability. Put simply, without strong launch systems on the ground, the rockets don't go anywhere. I'm requesting that the committee keep this mission on track by providing $590 million for the exploration ground systems in fiscal year 2020 and an additional $50 million to continue the construction of the second mobile launcher, which, when completed, will give us a unique multiple launch capability and further protect our national security. This will also preserve the fiscal year 2019 approved funding levels. You can't help being impressed with the progress and development of the commercial space sector. I'm excited about launching American astronauts from American soil aboard both Boeing Starliner crew vehicle and SpaceX Crew Dragon. These low Earth orbit missions are important for sustaining our research being conducted on the International Space Station, allowing NASA to plan bold, deep space exploratory missions. One final point, as I have often said, space is critical to our national security. It's the ultimate military high ground, and whoever controls space will control the destiny of the world. That's why it's so important that we maintain America's leadership in space. The Defense Intelligence Agency released a report in January titled Challenges to Security in Space, which discusses plans by China and Russia to develop their own versions of super heavy lift space vehicles similar to our own SLS. Now's the time to double down on America's space program and commit the resources necessary to keeping America first in space. It would be foolish to relinquish this military high ground to Russia and China, who perhaps do not have America's best interest in mind. I want to again thank you, Chairman Serrano and Ranking Member Adderholt, and committee for your time. The space has been one of the truly bipartisan issues in Congress. I very much enjoyed working across the aisle on the issue. Our achievements in space have served to unify our nation and the world. I ask my colleagues to join as we continue to build a foundation for the next decade to be defined by human exploration, scientific discovery, and American achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. Just one point to make, and that is that in the change of ranking member and chairman in this committee, one thing did not change, and it's our respect and our love for the work that NASA does. So your words are not falling on closed ears here. We can't tell you you can walk out with the money, but we can tell you that it's not just an exercise in making a statement.
I've never felt that way in this committee.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure, Mr. Chairman. Okay.
I appreciate your comments on that, and I agree, and we appreciate your testimony. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Jackson Lee, please join us.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, first of all, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Adderholt, both of you have had the opportunity in the years that I've served to work with, and I thank you very much for your very sincere and important work on committees that I have overlapping jurisdiction as a member of the Judiciary Committee. So these are very important issues before me. I'd like to generally make a statement dealing with the work of the issues of commerce, the issues of justice, and the issue of science. Much of this are economic engines that are important. I've been on the Science Committee for a number of years in my early service to this Congress. It is an important committee, and I still remain on the Judiciary Committee. As it relates to commerce, one of the important responsibilities of commerce is the census. That is the lifeline of the American people in ensuring that the work of counting Americans, everybody that is here, is important. And I am a strong supporter of $8 billion and may need a little bit more for the census, because I think we need to address concerns with our very diverse population. As I recall in the Constitution, it's to count every single person. It doesn't ask them for any litmus tests or who they are, but they're in this country and they need to be counted. So I hope that some of the extra attachments or extra restraints about asking questions on citizenship and otherwise, that we realize that the Constitutional Fathers intended that every single person be counted. Let me now indicate my concern on criminal justice reform, advancement of scientific knowledge, and space exploration, and expanding the economic opportunity. I support $300 million for community-oriented policing. I think we need to restore that. Remember, that program came in under the 1990s with President Clinton. I will tell you, our law enforcement celebrate the opportunity to invest in good law enforcement, rebuilding the trust and confidence between the law enforcement and community, and I think the COPS program can help that. I support $75 million for the National Instant Background Check. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, we have just passed legislation regarding the universal background check, but we also had the NICS fix that individuals who were able to squeak through and get guns, like Dylan, like the gentleman who went into a South Carolina church, Charleston, South Carolina, and killed 9 worshipers. This money is very important. I support $450 million for the Burn Justice Assistance Grants. Just passed on the floor of the House the reauthorization of the Juvenile Block Grant and the Bullying Intervention and Prevention. Talk to any parent in America's schools and neighborhoods. They're crying out for intervention programs dealing with bullying and cyberbullying. My legislation deals with that. Burn grants can be very helpful in a number of issues, from juvenile justice, crime prevention, education, and corrections. I support $255 million for the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. It's important to recognize the critical role of this program, and particularly in Texas. I support $150 million for Second Chance Act. This is something that I worked on with Danny Davis. He was the lead, but it provides grants to government agencies, and I would like to see us ensure $150 million. I would argue that there are so many people that are impacted by this. that I'd like and hope the committee could consider increasing that amount. I support $500 million for the Violence Against Women Act. I wrote the bill that is now headed toward the United States Congress floor of the House. We have passed it, had a hearing in the subcommittee, marked it up in the full committee. It's an important initiative that has a large amount of funding for our law enforcement to be able to prosecute. And we realize that domestic violence is an epidemic and the importance of providing law enforcement and counseling and all of that. And so this is a very important funding source. I support $35 million to prevent the trafficking of girls. Houston, Texas has been called the epicenter of trafficking. Trafficking is all around the world. And the one point that I'd make about trafficking, again, I ask and encourage increased funding. The one thing about trafficking is it's recycling. These girls can be recycled. These boys can be recycled. You can use drugs is one thing, but you can make money on cycling these children in the trafficking business, and we need to stamp out trafficking. And so I would support increase in that. $250 million for the juvenile justice programs. I've mentioned earlier the importance of these programs. I am looking to reform the juvenile justice system. Many people don't realize, and I certainly would hope this could support best practices, that juveniles are not sentenced. They are sent to the juvenile system with no sentence, and literally they can stay there till they're 21. I think credible adults and family members would want to see a better pathway for their young people, for them not to be part of the recidivism of someone who stays in a system for 8 years or more because they come in at 12 or 13 and they have infractions, and all of a sudden they're there until they're 21 years old. And so I'm hoping that maybe language could suggest that states need to be more effective and creative with how they house juveniles. I support $125 million for the Debbie Smith DNA backlog. I've worked on this issue with a number of my colleagues, and this has to do with the DNA labs. And before we got our hands into it, DNA labs are dealing with rape kits across the nation. It was appalling. We've made a great difference. I hope the $125 million is, in fact, sufficient, but I would encourage consideration on that one as well. Let me quickly say the Civil Rights Division, it's something that I hope we can look at in a bipartisan way. It's a very important set of agency, and it's $30 million. I just want to make sure that they are able to deal with the intrusion of outsiders, Russian adversaries and others into our election process. I want them to be able to protect the voting rights, to protect civil rights, to be able to stand in the courts against hate crimes, and they really need to be assured with the resources and investigatory resources that they need. I would encourage an increase in the $30 million, but I support it. $500 million for legal services is a vital organization. Many times they are the only lifeline. If you don't have a public defender, the only lifeline for the vulnerable in things like disability benefits families. Finally, with science, I support 1.25 for the NASA's Commercial Crew Program, but I also support ensuring that the Orion, which is our product, it comes back online, which is our, in quotes, space shuttle that we can work on. I support $40 million for the National Space Grant College and Fellowship Programs. Science has created such an energy of economic infusion. And I enjoy being on the Science Committee because of the opportunities for protecting research and development. But I think with your leadership on these issues, you can know that these dollars create economic engines. I support $35 million for the Hispanic Serving Institutions undergraduate program at the National Science Foundation because we need to diversify science and to make sure everyone has an opportunity. And I mentioned economic opportunity, so I support $32 million for minority business development and $275 million for the economic development. Let me conclude by saying this. The Justice Department is very important to all of us. It is the anchor of justice and the anchor of being the people's lawyer. And so I'm just concerned that as you proceed with your review, I know there's an authorizing committee, that we can look to the Justice Department not to file frivolous lawsuits, and that they hold up what the American people want. And I'm a victim of that. I'm a victim of that because I'm from the state of Texas. And so now there is a lawsuit to completely dismantle the Affordable Care Act using the case in Texas, when Texas has been the largest state, someone said that some other states are competing with them, the largest state of uninsured individuals. We can't afford to lose access to health care, pre-existing condition. And my state is being used to abolish the Affordable Care Act with no replacement. I don't know who makes decisions. I assume, obviously, the president controls but there is a Department of Justice. So I would just offer to say you have the oversight over this committee, and just know that we're suffering. And I don't know how this lawsuit is going to play out. Obviously, my state leaders were involved in it, but it's sad, and I would just hope that we would look to do what is for the greater good of the American people. I thank you very much again for your leadership, and it's a lot of work, and I hope that my comments about supporting certain important elements of the work will play a role, because I think it will benefit not only the 18th Congressional District in Texas, but the whole nation.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. I suspected when I saw you that you were going to cover a vast area because your advocacy has been that for so many years in Congress, where you cover a lot. In fact, I think the only thing you left out was a congressional pay raise, but that's never going to happen, so forget it. I just want to tell you that so many of the things you mentioned are of great interest to both the ranking member and the chairman. I have a special interest in the census, and everybody should, because the census really tells us who our country is, who we are, and how we can go forward. In fact, I would either, having been born in a territory of Puerto Rico, I wouldn't even want the territories to be included in the final count. They're not now, so they're American citizens who don't get counted in the population of the United States. And I know the Constitution says count the people amongst the states, but they didn't envision holding a colony for 120 years or so. So there's a lot, but there's so many of the things you mentioned are things that we will be talking about. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you for the time given. Thank you.
Mr. Brooks, Congressman Mo Brooks.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chairman Serrano and Ranking Member Adderholt. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I come to emphasize the importance of the Space Launch System, commonly referred to as SLS, to achieve America's space goals. As a nation, America must strive to inspire the next generation. The SLS is America's catalyst that inspires our next generation of engineers and explorers. Alabama's Marshall Space Flight Center has played a vital space role for NASA and America. In a way, America's space program was born in Alabama. By way of but one example, we designed and engineered the Apollo 5 rocket that took American astronauts to the moon. Today, we play an integral role in the designing, engineering, and testing of SLS. NASA's and its suppliers' great work is turning science fiction into reality. The SLS helps ensure America's continued dominance in space, a dominance that includes returning astronauts to the moon for long-term exploration and exploration to Mars and beyond. I support NASA's goals and believe the SLS is integral to achievement of those goals because it is the only vehicle that can generate the thrust and lift necessary to send the Orion spacecraft, astronauts, and a large cargo to the moon on a single mission. The SLS will be the most powerful rocket that man has ever created. The lift capabilities of the SLS are unparalleled with transformative capability. There is no other rocket built or in production with anywhere near the capability of the SLS. America's long-term space priorities will benefit from staying the course. The SLS will be the most powerful rocket ever built and the only rocket powerful enough to carry the weight of the Orion spacecraft or the Deep Space Gateway to the moon, both of which are necessary to accomplish America's space policy goals. It is important that Congress stay the course, support existing law, and provide required funding so that America can once again achieve greatness in space exploration. America's space program has been and should remain a bipartisan area for congressional support. I ask that this committee continue the spirit of bipartisan cooperation in space policy by supporting SLS. Adequate funding for the SLS is critical to achieving our nation's space policy. The Appropriations Committee has been consistent over the past several years in providing the funding needed for these programs, and I ask this committee and subcommittee to continue to support full SLS funding in the FY 2020 Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. As I said before, we take very seriously all of these programs that fall under this category, the NASA programs and so on. And this committee has always been very favorable to NASA and to these programs. So we will consider to take that into consideration, and we welcome your thoughts as we've heard them, and we thank you for them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just say, yeah, you've articulated, I think, the issues very well, and certainly look forward to working with you to help make our space program here in the United States second to none. So thanks for your testimony.
Thank you, Congressman Adderholt.
Ms. Holland. Congresswoman Holland.
Good afternoon. Thank you for
afternoon.
having me. Chairman Serrano, Ranking Member Adderholt, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to speak about some key priorities for the CJS bill. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate the hard work that all of you do. And in Chairman Serrano, I thank you for the years of service to our country. I'm going to first talk about the 2020 census. Many areas of my state of New Mexico are rural. In fact, there's more rural areas than there are urban areas, with little to no broadband access. This makes it a challenge to conduct the census. New Mexico has some of the worst poverty rates in the nation. In fact, half of our population is Medicaid eligible. So it's essential to our state that we have a successful 2020 census to ensure both proper representation in this body and the proper distribution of federal resources to our communities. The Census Bureau faces a number of challenges, including the President's administration's efforts to add an inflammatory question about citizenship that put the success of the 2020 census in jeopardy. I urge you to fund the Census Bureau at the level needed to get an accurate count, including establishing partnerships with hard-to-count communities and conducting the necessary outreach, and that would include Indian tribes. Not just in New Mexico, but across the country. Next, I'd like to talk about gun violence. Every day, 100 Americans die from gun violence and hundreds more are shot or injured. Last month, I joined students at Cleveland High School in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, who were victims of gun violence. They had a shooting at their school. Thankfully, no one was physically harmed in the incident that the students experienced, but the emotional distress is very real. Students' greatest worry should be preparing for their next exam, not dodging the next bullet. Guns are the second leading cause of death for American children and teens. Our nation is facing a gun violence epidemic that needs solutions, not just thoughts and prayers. An important part of the solution is improving the background check process to ensure that guns do not get in the wrong hands. I urge the committee to include $100 million for the National Instant Criminal Background Check System Program, NICS. Next, I'd like to address sexual assault. I also urge the committee to support survivors of sexual assault in law enforcement efforts by providing at least $49 million for the National Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. The level passed by the House in fiscal year 2018. My own state of New Mexico has seen the benefit of these grants. At the end of 2018, the state lab cleared its backlog, but there is still work to be done. Backlogs persist in many of the other labs across the state, and I imagine in the country. Every rape kit that remains untested represents a missed opportunity to bring closure and healing to a survivor and compromises our public safety. Sexual assault survivors deserve better, and Congress should support any efforts that bring about more justice. And with respect to Indian country, Indigenous people face serious problems in our country. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Broken Promises report that just came out a few months ago details the government's breach of the trust responsibility and neglect of federal obligations, causing a lack of funding for fundamental services for Native Americans. The chronic lack of funding has led to a severe lack of resources for tribal public safety and justice systems, resulting in Native Americans experiencing some of the nation's highest rates of crime and victimization. The DOJ also reported more than 4 in 5 Native women have experienced violence within their lives, more than half enduring sexual violence. In urban areas, the silent crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women is increasing. To address this crisis in the Native American community, I urge the committee to provide robust funding for victim advocates in state courts, especially for Indigenous people experiencing this more than normal higher rate of sexual assault and domestic violence in urban locations. Thank you for this opportunity to address you, and if you need any other information, we'd be happy to.
Well, we thank you for your testimony today. The issues you bring up are very important issues that this committee will be looking at, from the census to sexual assault, sexual violence. All of them are issues that are very, very important, and it's good to have members that can give us firsthand information about many issues, and so we thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. I look forward to working with you, and thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much.
And now we have as our next witness, Chairman Poklowski. I'm not going to make that mistake of calling you anything else.
Chairman, thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing to sit with you on full committee for the next several years.
You're welcome, Mr. Chairman.
You have my full statement for the record.
Yes.
I would like to summarize that I am here on behalf of 2 priorities. The first is the funding for the International Trade Commission, and secondly, appropriate funding for the implementation of the Civil Rights Cold Case Records Collection Act of 2018. The ITC, the International Trade Commission, does very important work as far as enforcing our laws to protect American workers against illegally traded goods and services. The Office of Management and Budget submitted a request for $91.1 million. Under the law, the ITC submits an independent budget estimate, and their request is for $101 million, and that is the request I'm here to support. In fiscal year 2020, the ITC will need additional resources to conduct analysis required by the American Manufacturing Competitiveness Act of 2016. This law requires the ITC to collect petitions to suspend or reduce certain tariffs in a forthcoming miscellaneous tariff bill. Further, Section 232 and 3 stages of Section 301 tariffs have required the ITC to revise their harmonized tariff schedule of the United States 13 times this past year, as compared to 3 times in a typical year. And finally, the ITC does need to update and modernize their information technology infrastructure and manage an increasing and complex caseload. Secondly, I am here to testify on behalf of the funding to fully implement the Civil Rights Cold Case Records Collection Act of 2018. I understand there are negotiations going on between your subcommittee as well as the Subcommittee on Financial Services and Government General as to the appropriate venue to fund this effort. I do understand that thoughtful consideration will take place and a resolution will happen. I think for too long, families of lynching and other hate crime victims have gone without information regarding crimes against their ancestors. I remain deeply cognizant of the legacy of racial inequality that continues to be present today in the United States, and I believe that we should do everything in our power to confront and address the suffering caused by racial terror and violence. And with that, I do thank you for your time today.
Well, we thank you, and you know how the system works, and we take, I can add to that, that we take very seriously your concerns, and we will take it keep it in mind as we move along. Mr. Adderholt?
Just say thank you. Of course, you're no stranger to this subcommittee, so good to have you back today with us, and so thanks for your testimony. Very. There's a lot today. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. The hearing is adjourned.